hours.
The weekly startup reality check. AMA.
Yeah. Not that we're saying most founders live in Fantasyland, but I will say that dreams are where startups go to die.
Ooh.
So
Where do they go to live?
they they go into the lab. That's what they do.
They do. They use science.
They science the shit out of this stuff. That's what the startups that are going to last and go forward. That's what they freaking do. The startups that just live in heads and dreams. That's just where they go to die. Speaking of startups going to die, we're taking your questions today so that we can shit all over your ideas. Just going for that explicit rating, that's all.
I don't know that LinkedIn does that. I don't know that LinkedIn.
Well, this goes on the podcast feed.
Right.
I think more people probably listen on the podcast feed than join us live. But y'all should join us live because it's more fun. Like, just come. We're on YouTube and LinkedIn right now. Probably if you're on the podcast, it's not right now. But every Friday at noon, like, this is what we do. And we come and we hang out and we talk to y'all and we answer your questions. And you can always submit a question in advance at jdm.bio. Click the calendar. There's a link there, link in the show notes as well. So you can, ask a question, get a little bit more breathing space. But we love having the conversations with you guys. So you come, you can ask a question, you can give an opinion. This is just a community thing, way for the Traction Lab to give back. We don't charge any money for this. There's no sponsors on any of this. I'm not saying that we would reject, if Factor Meals or BetterHelp or something wants to advertise on the podcast. I'm not saying we'll say no, but right now we're not doing any of that. So
would you say yes to supplement brands, knowing how much you believe?
I would not. So here's the thing.
Whoa! Right. Like you don't have a number. You don't have a number related to that.
Oh, like a dollar amount? Like, would you do it?
Yeah.
$1? Is this like the version of the game of like, would you lick that? And they say no, and say, if I gave you $10 million, would you lick that? Is that what the game we're playing here?
Sure.
You know what? Like, I like to think that there isn't a number that would get me to betray my principles. But if we put some boundaries on it, then that could be, that might be something that works. But I feel like we are an evidence-based podcast, and we really lean into requiring evidence and over the vibes of things. And so for us to then hawk a product, that would then also be in violation of that very principle of evidence, even though it's not our particular field of science, then I think that is a sort of a betrayal of the things that we stand for. That's where I'm out on that.
Sure.
I did take a look at the questions we got today, and that's going to rear its ugly head again, because I saw one of the business.
We desperately need your questions in the chat.
Yeah, just to avoid it.
It's that would be procrastination. It's unprocessed fear. We'd have to do it at some point, but
All right. Well, for all y'all out listening, so can I tell you, like, since we won't be recording like our regular podcast episode, for a couple of weeks, we pre-recorded them because of your travel.
Well, you just gave our secret away.
I think people know about vacations. I think there's a reason we haven't missed an episode in a really long time, and it's because every once in a while we record a couple in advance. But I don't have a frivolous thought, so I'm going to share for all of you out there something that you should do. Okay, but I'm going to do it at the end. And if you have a frivolous, there's nothing more frivolous than this. It's just a super fun thing. But so if you have one that you want to share too, that's to you, Cameron, and to everybody listening, we're going to come back to that later. We can do some frivolous thoughts on our office hours, which is not something we normally do. Okay, now let's dive in. If you've got questions, we'll prioritize and throw them in the chat. But until you do, those questions that y'all spend in advance are where we're going. Let's dive in. You ready? I'm ready. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So I think you'll throw that into the chat so that y'all can see it. But this is for, of all things, bounce house rental companies. It's B2B SaaS on the bounce house rental companies. They're at 43,000 in ARR, so you never know how big a market is. And it's a booking and delivery routing. And they say the problem is that most customers really just one guy with a truck and some inflatables. That makes it sound very sad. They do like 2 to 3 rentals per weekend. Oh, they do like 2 to 3 rentals per weekend. Our software costs more per month than they make on a single rental, and it feels backwards. They operate on Facebook Marketplace, mostly super casual operations. I'm not sure I heard a question in there, but are we calling out like that? Is the question like this feels backwards? Is that a problem? I think is the question here. So what do you think, Cameron? Is that a problem?
Sorry, I'm engaging the chat. We do have a question that came in. I was doing my job firing it up, so you kick us off, and then I'll follow suit here.
You'll catch up. Okay. Well, okay. So I think the basic question is like there's no question mark in here, but like I think the question is like, all right, we're selling software to these bounce house rental companies, but the amount that they charge per month is more than they make on a single rental, and that feels backwards. Is that right or wrong? And I would say like in and of itself, no. That like because they're paying for, you're comparing the cost for an entire month of your service to one rental on one like afternoon. And so those aren't really the right comparators. The question is, are we delivering sufficient value over the course of that month to make that fee worth it? That's really the right comparator. And the only other detail that you really gave was that they do like 2 to 3 rentals per weekend. And so if we do the math on that, it's 2 to 3 rentals. Let's just say it's 2.5, and there's 4.3 weeks in a month. Then we're talking 10 or so rentals on the low end. And so if 10 or so rentals on the low end, and so 1/10 of that is kind of what we're seeing, then like, I don't know, that doesn't seem too crazy, if I'm being honest. So yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything else to say about that. You're making money. You got 43,000 in recurring revenue, so it's not like people aren't paying for this at all. They're not really objecting to it. So like if you're getting pushback, if you're getting churn, if you're getting rejections, like stuff like that, then like let's bring that up and have that conversation. But otherwise, I don't see anything inherently wrong with that other than a size of market issue.
Yeah, I think the size of market issue is definitely one that they need to be focusing on. And again, part of that is understanding what type of business you want to run. If it's a lifestyle business and you can get to that revenue threshold that makes sense for the lifestyle you want to live, then like that's success for sure. But if it's a scalable, highly venture backable company, like you're going to want to understand how you're going to grow into other markets. The big thing for me that I would like maybe be focusing on is like focusing on what outcome are they ultimately getting out of it and what's that return on investment. And so it sounds like there's some questioning related to the initial kind of payment that they're making is larger than just one single rental. And so like at what point do they get the return on that investment? And so we see this all the time in our own startup. Like what's the payback period? What's their payback period in terms of that return on investment? So if you're saving them money, is it after them doing 3 rentals that they get their money back on that month? And so therefore, everything else on that is they're basically, adding to the bottom line going forward. So understanding again, what outcome that we're deriving. If we're helping save time, what does that time unlock? If it's helping decrease costs, how much costs are we decreasing? And does that math actually pencil out for them?
Yeah, I think that's that.
Cool.
We did get a couple of questions in the chat from Keelan, so let's tackle those. I'll throw up the first one here. When an idea changes significantly during validation, how do you tell whether that change is a healthy pivot, a loss of focus, or a sign that the original idea should evolve completely? I think I'll start here by saying what the nature of a pivot is. So a pivot isn't necessarily that anything changed. It's that there's something central to the theory of our startup that changed, who we're serving, how we're serving them, etc. And so those are the fundamental things that we're changing. So when we are starting to get data back that's invalidating that core thing and it necessitates a pivot, that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about a healthy pivot, like I don't think there's necessarily an unhealthy pivot if that's supported by the data. And so like a loss of focus isn't really the result of a pivot. A loss of focus is probably the result of pivoting constantly, which is probably not great. But in the early days when you're doing discovery, we have a thing that is incredibly amorphous. And so to try to like say it's this and anything outside of this represents a loss of focus, I actually think is a category error because we don't have a this yet. We have this space that we're exploring and we're trying to figure out what's what. And so as we encounter these little hypotheses and then the little rejection of our hypotheses, we're defining negative space. And then we're trying to form a picture within what's left in order to say, this is what we think the thing is. And so I know that that's kind of like a muddy, answer there. But what we're looking for when we're doing discovery is consistency. And so as we start to get data back, we're looking for that data to be consistent. If we're getting very inconsistent data, then that's something that we need to address because it actually isn't serving the function that we think it's serving. And that could be because we're just not we're not talking to a homogenous group of people. If like we're talking to a really heterogeneous group of people, we're going to get different answers because they're different people. And so then it's like, well, why are we talking to all these different people? What were we trying to do? Were we talking to a heterogeneous group in order to identify a potential early adopter or beachhead segment that we could go after? That's like, okay, so now we can take this heterogeneous group of people that we've talked to and say, all right, well, let's put in one camp the people who don't have the problem with sufficient severity and urgency, and then in the other camp the people that do, and then we can start to say what separates those two groups of people, and then start talking to less of the people who are in that first group because they just don't have the problem. That's one way to go from heterogeneous to homogeneous. Well, at the same time, that's not a problem of focus, even though you don't really know where you're going, and the thing that you're trying to do doesn't really have a shape yet. Because it shouldn't have a shape yet, because we aren't there yet. There's like the solution, the startup itself is like one half of a puzzle piece, and until we know what the other half is, we can't make this one up. And this is like the solution in search of a problem thing, where people will design the startup. They'll have this puzzle piece, and they'll start running around like the prince with the slipper, trying to find Cinderella and see who does this thing fit on. And that's not a great way to create a startup. You want to start from the other way around, where you're saying like, who out there's missing a shoe?
Yeah, so I think just what we talk about around that is called the innovator's bias. So it's like I've created this thing, and so I'm going to go hunt for the problem it's solving versus, okay, I have an idea for what the solution might look like, but then going to the core work of loving the problem, not the solution, and unearthing those problems worth solving and that are both urgent and severe. And so one last kind of framework to add to it, because I see a couple additional questions that you followed up with, which is awesome, is like thinking through this process that we call the 4 steps to the epiphany. And so the first is all about the customer discovery, which is the great work that you're doing. It's identifying that clear customer that has that urgent and severe pain point, and it's identifying those problems worth solving. And so in these cases, you're doing the like customer interviews, you're doing observational interviews, maybe you're doing problem resonance testing to see if there's actually truly a pain out there. And we want to get strong evidence that's self-reported. So not something to say, hey, do you have this problem? And they say yes. You want to start to gather those stories, and you asked a follow-up question related to like, how do you know when to then transition from some of that discovery work, or you start seeing a pattern? Well, part of it is, the first maybe 10 people that you talk to, maybe 3 of them have the same, elements around the self-reporting of these problems. And so it's identifying like what we say is negative space. So how do you move from those 7 people to say, how do I get in front of a higher percentage of those 3 individuals? So to say the next 5 people you talk to, how does it become 4 out of the 5 are that kind of core person that has these urgent and severe pain points? And so when you start to have that predictability on, I can get in front of these individuals with this urgent and severe pain point, then we can start to transition to what we call customer validation. And so we're testing for willingness to pay. And so this is where we're actually putting sufficient offers in front of them to see if there's actually intent behind this particular thing that you're ultimately aiming to build. And that doesn't mean you have to actually go build the solution. It's ultimately saying we understand and believe this is the value that they're going for, and that we ultimately then want to actually see if there's intent. And that's where we see a lot of the pivoting process is we gathered this evidence that we thought we have this core customer, or what we say is an ICP, an ideal customer persona. We then go in front of them with an offer, and they say, nope, I'm not interested, or I don't have intent to buy what you're ultimately creating. Well, was it the wrong person? Was it the wrong product? Or was it the wrong promise in that space? And then that's what we're ultimately pivoting on going forward. So I'll pass it back to you, Jay. Dims, looks like you pulled up the next question.
Yeah, we could definitely elaborate on that one, but since these are related, we'll just hit up the next one, which is during customer discovery, how do you organize and interpret all the information you're collecting so it turns into clear patterns instead of becoming overwhelming? I think I have two answers to this. One is being selective on what we're actually collecting, or maybe not selective, intentional is what I mean. Be intentional about the data that we're actually collecting. So that speaks again to, are we just talking to this massive heterogeneous group of people asking massively open-ended questions? That process is just going to look fundamentally differently than if we were trying to validate whether or not a particular group of people had a particular problem, right? That's very confined. And so our intent for that is very different. And so the primary way that we organize and interpret information is based around that particular intent. In other words, if we're talking to this massively heterogeneous group of people that we're trying to find who has the problem with sufficient severity and urgency to make them a willing buyer, then that tells us the kind of data that we're trying to collect, and therefore how to organize it. Because what we're inherently looking for is the very pattern around that problem itself and their experience of that problem. And so that becomes very straightforward to do. Whereas if we're doing something that is a bit more validatory, validation focused, you didn't like validatory? Is that what that was?
Is that a word?
It is now. But yes. So,
is this some pseudoscience stuff? Some pseudo grammar or pseudo language?
You know what? Like for the longest time, I was a linguistic prescriptivist and said that rules of grammar were the rules of grammar and the rules of language were the rules of language. But you know what? As I've gotten older, I think now I approach it with a bit more flexibility than I used to. But when you're looking at something validation focused, you're asking a narrower question, right? Does this group of people have this particular problem? Will this group of people click this particular ad? And so that question becomes much more straightforward to answer. And then again, the data collection kind of takes care of itself. So that's the first thing, is like be intentional about what we're trying to do. If you try to do something open-ended, you're going to get very open-ended results. And those are going to be something you have to figure out after the fact what to do with. And that can be hard. Sometimes you end up in that situation because you've invalidated what you're working on. You're like, let me find another pattern. I'll come back to that. But at the outset, that shouldn't be what we're trying to do. Even though we're asking open-ended questions, we're asking open-ended questions because there's a space we want to explore. So being intentional about that tells us how to gather the information. The second thing is on the other side is how do we, interpret that, identify patterns, that kind of thing. Sometimes, most of the time, if we're being intentional about it, that should be fairly straightforward because we're looking for something like how many people self-report that they have this particular problem in their top 3 problems, right? That's pretty clear. It's a yes or no. But there's going to be a lot of other things that aren't that clear. And so the best possible advice I can give here is make sense of it using AI. Why not? Like take all that information, chuck it at your AI intern and have them process some of that information. Don't go too crazy with that. But you can use that for hypothesis generation, saying what are you seeing in common between these 8 interviews that I did. But that's a garbage in, garbage out thing. So if you have transcripts, it works really well. If you don't have transcripts, and you're just going by your loose notes, it only has what you had, and so that's going to be a fairly limiting factor. But those are the 2 things that I would say. What do you have, Cameron?
I don't have a ton more to add. I think the more intentional you have those conversations, and part of that is like having some set of like assumptions or a hypothesis of what you're expecting those conversations to report out. And it doesn't mean it have to be scripted, because like ultimately if you script it, you're taking away the story of what you're going to be learning. But having very different conversations is going to be hard to parse out those patterns versus having a similar set of kind of core types of stories that you're trying to learn is a really key component. And so the last kind of tool I would share we use this kind of saying around self-reporting, and the reason being that that's stronger evidence than you kind of obviously leading them to the answer that you want. And so then kind of also telling story-based answers is much more key, because then you can start to see how they're actually going and trying to solve the problem currently, and you'll see the energy and emotion related to the severity and urgency of the particular problem. But the thing I was going to share was the mom test is a great resource to dive into if you want to have higher quality conversations and kind of set those conversations up to, I would say, have more intentionality in what you're learning. And that will then help in the parsing through those patterns.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Last question from Keelan, and feel free to ask more. But the last one that I see in the chat here that's kind of related to this string is, how do you know when to stop gathering more feedback and start acting, even if the direction feels uncertain? Do you want to tackle this one first?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing was, I'd mentioned kind of the process of, like, you say you start talking to 5 people and only 2 have kind of self-reported this problem, and then you get 3, and then now you're, on a consistent matter, you can get in front of 5 out of 5 people, and they all self-share that this is a urgent and severe problem. Now we then want to move from that discovery into validation, and that's where we're actually, again, saying if it's not the start acting, is you're already acting in the sense of you're doing the customer discovery work. And so we have this topic called time to customer. And so in the path of time to customer, currently it's about understanding through conversations. Now the next thing that we want to ultimately go and test is there true intent to pay for this potential offering that we're creating. And so the acting shouldn't be to go build the thing. It should be ultimately, how do you get a sufficient offer in front of them to see if they're actually willing to pay for what you're trying to create. And so that could be creating an artifact of a letter of intent. It could be setting up a landing page that then has them setting up a pre-order or something of that sort, whatever makes sense for your current business model. But that would be kind of the core next component. But it's when you start to have that pattern at a high probability and predictable that, hey, I know this is what my customer looks like. I go have the conversation. I get the answers that I was expecting. Okay, now let's transition from, we don't need to unearth more problems. We just now need to validate that there's intent to pay for those problems.
Awesome. I don't think I really have too much to add for that. It's just consistency. You got to be looking for the consistency. The last part of the question, even if the direction feels uncertain, this is where we talk about degrees, because there's not a binary between certain and uncertain. Certainty is not a thing. And this is where, from a scientific perspective, we look at this in what we would call Bayesianism, right? There's a prior probability of something being true. And then we get some more data from an experiment, and then we have a posterior probability, where now we can revise that probability based on the new data that we got, meaning our confidence should increase or decrease. And over time, our goal is, of course, increase confidence on things. But that's all we're ever doing, is trying to see, where is our confidence on something. And so the more data that we're getting, the more higher our confidence. And all we're trying to do is increase our confidence in thing A, not to 100%, but to a degree where it's no longer the riskiest thing. And now thing B becomes more risky than thing A because we have some data for thing A. And then we move on to thing B because that now is the riskiest thing. So I'll add on the science-y part of that, but it's otherwise identical to what you said. All right, we did get a little reply from Leia here. AI seems to have a bit of confirmation bias. Be careful with the questions you ask if using it to analyze transcripts. 100%. Yes, sycophancy is also really real in here as well. And so this is, when I say garbage in, garbage out, I only mentioned the data itself, but the prompt is going to really, really matter here as well. This is something that you have to be careful to prompt around. And then you'll get better results with certain models than you will with other models. So keep that in mind too. We used to call it prompt engineering. Now it's more about context engineering. And so if the only context that's in there is whatever they know about it, your AI knows about you, and then the transcript that you gave it, you're likely not to get the best possible results out of that. So that's a whole topic for another thing, but you are absolutely right. And thanks for adding that in. Wouldn't want to lead somebody down that path at all. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for adding that in. We'll move on to our next question here. So this is a med tech startup for or health tech, med tech startup for acupuncture clinics. They have a paid pilots with 13 clinics. It's like patient scheduling and treatment notes. A couple clinics want Chinese medicine herb inventory management, which would be a huge feature build. Others don't just prescribe herbs at all. Not sure if we niche down further or keep it simple. So I have a lot to say here. And I'm going to be constantly, this is the one I alluded to in our in our opening here, because I'm certainly bringing in the bias of science to this process. It's just why I say, like, for ethical reasons, get out of this business. But setting that aside for a minute, it's much too early to be talking about that question. Like, yes, you're in some, some paid pilot stage. You didn't really say how much they're paying, but it's only 13 of them, and a couple of them are looking at this additional feature. That is not the kind of data that we can use to make a decision like, do we fundamentally pivot the product to include this massive new feature? That's just the wrong stage of this. If you're saying that these clinic management features are the big pain, and we can get people to pay to solve that pain, then that is our method to get into market, and the other things can come later if the data supports it. But when you're in the pay, like when you're in these early 13, couple of people are asking, for it, tap the brakes on that. It's just too soon. That's not a forever decision. That's a today decision. So, like, can we capture customers on this promise? And if we can capture customers on this promise in a way where the unit economics work out for us, then we're on the right path, as unethical as it may be.
Yeah, I think just sticking to, it seems, yes, very early to transition to like a whole new major feature. And I guess my like interpretation, this is probably like a builder that wants to go like build the next thing versus like, building that repeatable path of sales. Right. And so understanding that, like, maybe there is an opportunity down the line for such a inventory management, but let's focus on having that predictability to get in front of these paying customers, and then also move out of just even the paid pilots into, fully paid customers.
Awesome. Keelan dropped thanks. You are very welcome.
Ooh, yeah.
Happy that you found that information valuable, and happy to have you here today asking questions. If you guys have any more questions, whether you've asked or not, or comments or thoughts or anything else, drop them in. Otherwise, we best move on to the next question before I end up on an acupuncture rant. So let's
here, it's in the chat already. Let's move forward.
Excellent. So B2B SaaS for private investigators doing background checks and surveillance. They have an MVP in progress. They say case management for PIs. Talk to about 30 of them. They're all super paranoid about data security, and most won't put case info in the cloud. One guy said he doesn't even use email. Should we just build local only software, or are these people not in our market? They deal with sensitive info, so I get it, but also, how do you build a SaaS business for people who don't trust SaaS? That last question answered itself, just for the record. You cannot build SaaS for people who don't use SaaS. That's just the way that it is. Now, there's one thing that's really important to call out is when we talk about value proposition design, the methodology that we use at the Attraction Lab is not based on pain relievers and gain creators, but it's based on needs, wants, and fears as those relate to features, benefits, and experience. Right, so that's the model that we use at the Attraction Lab, and so the fear component of this is very real. That we can have that when it comes time to think about a particular solution, we have needs, which are things that we need. They have to happen. Like if it's a car, I have to get from A to B. Like that's what I have to have happen. I need to get from A to B. There's features, which is like, what are the like outcomes benefits, which are like the outcomes that we're looking for, like what benefit. These are emotional, right? So needs are not emotional. The benefits are always emotional outcomes, and then fears are things that we are afraid of, either in not adopting a solution or in adopting a solution. And fears can be rational or irrational. And so here, this idea of like security for this is an irrational fear. that's not like, is data security writ large rational? Yes, for a private investigator who, let's be honest, is taking photos of extramarital affairs, and then second to that for insurance claims, like that's what PIs do every day. And so like the idea that that's like the big, risk surface that we have to worry about is like putting this data in the cloud is not rational. But it doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's still real fear. And if you can't overcome that fear, by just to oversimplify, by putting the stamp on it of like using bank grade security, or something like that, then it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. They're just not your customer. I'll pause there, Cameron, let you chime in, and if there's anything.
Yeah, I just the biggest thing I'm tying, they say the stage is MVP in progress, and then they talk all about the solution and not anything about the pain point that they're solving for and like what that looks like. And so it's like the question is, how do we sell SaaS to someone who doesn't trust SaaS? Is like that's the innovator's bias at its core, where it's like, okay, like how do we get them to, how do we convince them is probably the thing they would say is, how do we convince them to use this because they're going to get such good value? Well, if like that's not how they want to solve the problem, or if they don't even have a problem, then that's not something we're ultimately going to ever be able to sell to them. And so we need to, I think, go back and look at like, maybe there is some sort of outcome that this case management will help them with. Maybe it's manage more cases. Maybe it's ease their load so they have more time with family. I don't know what the outcome that they're looking for is. But then if we can unearth what that looks like and how they're currently solving for it now and what a new form of that might actually look like, we can then ultimately, I think start to solve for that particular problem. But we can't just try to put a, what's the square peg in a round hole, or whatever the saying is.
Definitely. And we're also talking about no money changing hands at this at all. And so one possibility here is because we're not looking at the problem, or we're not looking at the user from the perspective of a problem, then we actually can't necessarily trust the feedback that we're getting on them not using a cloud. It just might be that this isn't powerful enough. They don't really like cloud stuff. Saying, hey, I'm worried about cloud security and all that is just a way for them to politely, say no without saying, your product sucks, or I don't need it that bad, or something like that. If the problem is big enough, then we can override some of those other concerns. And we don't have a way of knowing yet if that's true or if it's just a generic objection that you're getting. So yeah, this is why we don't build before we sell. We sell before we build. So, well, that was the last of the pre-submitted questions. Y'all only asked 3 today. Maybe that was because we or 3 this over the last 7 days. So maybe it's because we cut last week short. We did like a half an hour last week, and maybe y'all got so offended that you're like, we'll just ask light questions. I don't know. But we only got the 3. Super happy to be able to answer those. If you guys have other questions in the chat or anything you guys want to talk about, drop them in there. We will vamp for a minute because there's a 1-minute delay on LinkedIn. But we'll kind of vamp for a minute, and then we'll come back and answer any questions you have. And otherwise, we will depart. A couple of things, though, that we will do while we vamp here is a couple of shameless plugs, because we've got you. So one is the first is just some ways to plug into the Traction Lab ecosystem. So in addition to these office hours, if you want to get deeper involved in it, if you want to bring science to your project, to your startup, to the entrepreneurship that you're engaging in right now, then there's a couple of things you can do. One is to check out the Traction Lab Venture School. Cameron dropped that in the LinkedIn chat at least, but it's tlvs.link. And we are recruiting our next cohort for this, which will be sometime in June. And this is where we entirely focus on getting paying customers for your startup. That's the whole thing that we do, is how do we get paying customers for your startup? We bring in all the tools and tips and techniques to that process. And then it's a full year of support from the Traction Lab to help you do just that. So if you want to dive into that, tlvs.link, you can see how to get involved in that. Next link that Cameron dropped in there is the application for our investment readiness engine, which is something that we will be kicking off next month as well. And this is where we are bringing 15 companies in the Sacramento area into the lab to focus exclusively on making the company more fundable. That's not the pitch, that's the company itself. So we're going to work on how we not only create the strategy necessary to have a successful fundraise, but also in a way that ties back to the traction and everything else that we're doing there. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, check that out as well. We'll end with a showcase of the 4 to 6 or so companies that make the most progress on that fundraising, on that fundability journey, and then they will be competing for an investment from the Traction Lab group that we recruit for our goal is 100,000 in equity investment into that company. So there's some real money on the line. So check out the investment readiness engine. You can apply there. Applications are streaming in. So hit us up with that. And then you can check out the Traction Lab podcast. If you're already listening to this on the feed, thank you for subscribing. If you're not, you can check that out at the link in the show notes. And you can check out our Substack as well, where we publish weekly deep dives on subjects that you care about. All right. Well, we did not get any questions in my lengthy vamp there, so that's fine. We won't be offended. We're here to help you. But we can end with some frivolous thoughts, and I'm going to give you all something that's going to make your life a lot better. Do you have anything you wanna share, Cameron?
No, I'm not usually ready for that during office hours, so you're throwing us for a loop.
Well, let me tell you why. And it's because, like, I don't know if you guys have ever been to like a Starbucks and gotten, like, they have a shaken espresso thing that's on there, or there's some other coffee shops you can go and get a shakerado. And like they're fine most places. Like if you go to some cafes, you can get a really good shaken espresso, but not at a Starbucks. Like they're not that great. It's Starbucks quality stuff, which is, it is what it is. And if that's your bag, that's fine. But I started seeing in my TikTok feed people doing shaken espressos at home, and so I decided to give it a try. And what that meant is I had to buy a cocktail shaker and actually make a shaken espresso. So I'm going to give you the simplest possible thing to do that will be a shaken espresso that is absolutely fucking delicious. And if you don't have an espresso machine, you can do this with cold brew as well, which you can buy or make at home. But all you really need to do for the shaken espresso, this is it, is you take in your cocktail shaker, put in some ice. The bigger is a little better. Some ice, put in your like a double shot of espresso, a tablespoon at the most of brown sugar, a little vanilla if that's your bag, pinch of salt because it's going to bring everything together, and then cocktail shake it. Shake this thing up at least 20 seconds, and the espresso is actually going to get super foamy in that 20 seconds. Okay, then in a separate glass, ice, milk, pour the shaken espresso right into the milk. Creamy, delicious, absolutely great. Just a fantastic afternoon drink. I'm going to have one when we get off of here. And I just think you guys' life should be better if you get a shaken espresso. So add that to your life. Yeah, that's it. It's good. Change your life.
Just there you go. Change your life. Your life has forever changed.
next time you're at my office, Cameron, I'll make you a shaken espresso.
I've been there once in like 10 years.
Well, that's why I said the next time.
Yeah, you'll be making
once in 10 years. I've been in this office for less than 2, so it's not like.
All right, fair enough. I'll take you up on the offer. Looks like JP might take you up on the offer as well.
All right. Well, JP, next time that you are up, this way, come by and I will make you a shaken espresso. Is it an espresso martini with no vodka? So like espresso martinis get a bad rap because most of the time they're terrible. I've heard tell that you can find good ones, but they're really, really hard to find. So I can't really speak intelligently about that because it's not something I seek out because they just tend to be terrible. So I don't know, but kinda. I mean, it has milk, which I don't think is in an espresso martini. I don't think there's dairy in an espresso martini. But this has milk in it. But it's the espresso that's shaken and not the milk, which is what I think a lot of people don't get. You're actually just shaking the espresso with a little salt and the sugar with the ice in the cocktail shaker. And by doing that, it creates this really, really frothy espresso. It goes from black to like literally this cream color. Like it gets really frothy and light, and then you pour that into the milk, and it's just this like deliciously cohesive drink. So I don't know, JP, if you've had a delicious espresso martini somewhere, we'll do that together too.
So the one where I have had a pretty good one was actually at Plump Jack. So Governor Newsom's place in San Francisco. They're known for their espresso martinis. So that would be a place to check them out.
And how was it?
It was good. I mean, I'm not like a connoisseur of them, but yeah, I mean, they're definitely drinkable and tasted good. But I'm not like a coffee connoisseur as you are as well. So.
Well, that's fine.
So you like, I wouldn't have had the banana co-ferment flavor.
That's like a year ago.
Well, you got to come up with some new ones and new flavors for us.
I think JP's just trying to ruin this drink for me. Now he's saying it's a virgin espresso White Russian, which is just this is just getting less appealing over time. But all right. Well, that having been said, it's time I got on to making my virgin espresso White Russian. So
we'll call it a day there.
Yes. Well, we will see you guys back here every Friday, noon Pacific on LinkedIn and YouTube, and our regular podcast feed that drops on Saturday mornings in the feed. So check that out. Stay with us. Hit up those links for the Traction Venture School and the Investment Readiness Engine. Thanks for hanging out with us. Cameron, thanks for indulging me in my rant.
Of course. Always enjoy it, and appreciate everyone hopping in. Love the engagement, good questions, and always, love having people in the space. If there's, questions you didn't get to ask and you want to ask for next week, pre-submit those. We'll be rocking and rolling, but, be sure to like and subscribe, and we look forward to having you in the near next week. And with that, we'll